cracked cell versus uncracked cell. It's another good question we get. I mean, traditionally, cracked cell is what is on the market, and we decided not to crack our cell. I'm going to start the explanation coming right from our whole processing process. Yeah, when we pick our product, it comes in fresh. Obviously, we pick the buds off the tree, which is like the little flowers. They're called catkins, and they're picked and then they're weighed. These buds go onto drying racks. These drying racks go into a controlled environment. Basically, what this area is, we mimic nature and have this stuff dry in an area that's not affected by wind, it's not affected by moisture, and we can put some artificial heat into it to help promote the drying process. Once it's dried to a certain level, then obviously we can extract the pollen from the buds. And we discard the buds, and then we do either use it for compost or make soaps with it, and then the pollen is what we save. That goes into a drying facility to get it to a certain moisture content of the powder itself, and that's the process. And then it goes into a freezer fresh. I mean, that's the whole process of you getting your product. It's basically as fresh as it gets. It's just dried and put into a freezer.
Yeah, when you compare that to the process of getting the cracked cell pollen, the cracked cell pollen generally comes out of outside Canada. It's been the mason pollen that's you might hear in the market, which is essentially imported from China and rebranded here in different names, which is everything other than our pollen that's commercially available would be considered mason pollen, and that's all cracked cell. So the process of drying that is actually, it is still controlled environment in the sense that it's in large facilities, but it's ground dried. We do rack drying, and that's done on ground. So when you're laying the pollen on the ground, the buds are exposed to the air on one side, but not on the other side, so it's not drying properly, which means that you got to go in there and keep turning them around. The process of the manual turning around of the buds cracks the buds, the flower buds, it cracks those, and it creates residue. Then what they do is that they take the sifted pollen away from the buds, and then they recrack the small Mickey Mouse shaped pollen germ cells. And the reason that you might find if you do research online in terms of why is this product cracked, they oftentimes quote increased absorption. But when you dig deeper and you look at the studies, what you see is that the absorption of pollen, when you look at human studies, animal studies, pollen generally absorbs, and we are able to break it down with our stomach acid, about 60 to 70%. Some animals even 80% of the pollen they digest it properly. And then when you look at the studies that are quoted to justify the cracking of the cell, what they're looking at is water solubility. So they're looking at a cracked cell pollen compared to a non-cracked cell pollen, and they're saying that okay, a cracked cell pollen has about 15 to 20% increased water solubility of its proteins and water solubility of its sugars, carbohydrates, complex carbohydrates. But let's just step back. Why are we taking the pollen? We're taking the pollen for its bioidentical androgens. We're taking it for its antioxidants. We're taking it for its enzymes, things that if you were to actually go in and disturb the cell wall, which is historically through evolution designed to protect what is inside, these antioxidants, if you crack the cell wall, you're exposing that to oxygen and air. We know from experience working with the two different pollens, the imported pollen and the wild harvested Canadian pollen, that every time we try to make tinctures from the imported pollen, the tincture looks slightly discolored. It's a darker, deeper hue because of that oxidation process. So we really think that preserving the cell as is, as nature intended, is the best way to actually deliver this product. We also know that by doing this, we are not introducing any residual buds into the pollen and covering it up by breaking it. When you look at the cracked cell pollen, it has a flower-like texture. You look at it under microscope, it's tough to distinguish what else is gone in there. Whereas you look at our pollen and it's just pure whole cells, that are easily identifiable
Yeah.
as pollen of the pine trees. So there is a big disadvantage to cracking it, in my opinion, because the cracking reduces shelf life. It exposes its nutrients to oxidation, and it has the potential to hide any residual introduction of plant material as pollen, because these buds are yellow. Like, you crack it up enough, you mix enough yellow stuff in there. How are you going to know if it's pollen or if it's cell walls?
Yeah. I mean, another distinctual property of our pine pollen is you'll notice, like, just when you open it up and how clear it is, and when you shake the bottle, it looks just about liquid, and it's a dry product. It just flows very nicely. Magnetically too, sometimes you'll have static electricity and you'll just see these cool structures that the magnetic force creates with the pine pollen. Another really cool thing about our pine pollen is when you add it to a liquid, you'll mix it in, but eventually it'll all come to the top again. I mean, that's the proof that the product is still in its whole form. Like, it contains, like Saeed mentioned, it looks like Mickey Mouse through a microscope. Like, there's two little air sacs connected to it that's designed in nature in order to float through the air, in order to travel from tree to tree. That's the way you'd know, like, it's still floating on top of your product. So, I mean, that's the really cool thing and indication way of knowing that it's a pure wholesale pine pollen. And
Yeah.
actually, like, do you want to mention how naturally you could crack the pine pollen?
Yeah,
by
so it's
germinating?
like, yeah, exactly. So that's another cool thing about keeping it wholesale, right? You know, these air sacs that you're mentioning, when you look at cracked, quote unquote, cracked cell pollen, is basically you're stripping off these cracked cells, but leaving a lot of the structure intact. So it's the wholesale. If you just leave it in water, at a warm zone, roughly around like 26, 27 degrees Celsius, it starts shooting out the germination tube. Just hydrating the whole cell opens up these germination tube, which means that it allows the stomach acid to get in there and digest it. So the beauty of keeping the pollen wholesale is that as long as you're using it in a liquid kind of, as long as you're hydrating it, you're gonna get these germ cells activated and be able to digest it.
Yeah.
So it's from a production standpoint, the air sacs are actually a nuisance. We know that working with the pollen, it's it's everywhere. You wanna, so all these bottles are hand bottled instead of machine bottled, because as soon as you put a nozzle on this and to force the pollen in there, it's going everywhere,
Yeah.
right? So it becomes a big headache to handle uncracked cell wall pollen. So one of the things that is possibly happening, other than hiding residue introduction, is likely cracking the cells from the Chinese manufacturers cracking the cells, is to make it easier to handle in terms of bottling, in terms of production, in terms of using machinery to make it what it is. All of that to say that there are good reasons from a nutritional standpoint in terms of its oxidative stress, from protecting the cell itself, to maintain it whole. And there's good reasons from consumption standpoint to maintain it whole, because we can make sure that it gets to your hand whole without having been influenced through processing. And it's as simple as hydrating it before you consume in order to get its equal nutritional value.
Yeah, and our tincture is not necessarily cracked cell, but you're extruding all of those beneficial compounds in the tincture. You really have no reason to believe that you're not receiving the full nutritional profile by consuming our product.
Yeah.
Contact us on CanadianPinePollen.com. Look at us at YouTube. You can check us. You can shoot us an email at info@CanadianPinePollen.com. We also have a reference on the research page of our website, which is very informative.
Yeah, we recently actually put out a blog on uncracked versus uncracked cells. So check us out online. That goes through every reason that cracking and compares cracking versus non-cracking and the science behind it and the science behind the digestibility of uncracked pollen. So check us out online and make sure to leave a comment if you like on that blog.